This is Brady Young coming at you live from KPRZ, The Bullet.
Welcome to Motorbike Mondays, Episode 8. This is Evan with Race Tech Electric.
This is Brady with This is Brady with Seaweed and Gravel.
This is also Jared with Seaweed and Gravel.
So, welcome back to Motorbike Mondays. I hope you listened to our last episode, which was all about wiring harnesses.
Yeah, and we're still compiling up some kind of feedback from you guys to find out if we should do an extended podcast on wiring from scratch. Chances are, even if we don't get enough,
we'll probably do
it anyways, just because we like talking about stuff.
And it's a big part of building these bikes, even if you're just like working on a stock harness and troubleshooting it and stuff like that. It's almost
with all the wiring harness work we've been doing recently, it would probably be
beneficial.
A good topic.
Yeah, it's all very fresh in all of our minds.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's read some of our comments. Let's see here. First off, here, Brady, answer this guy. Zach had said on the website, he posted a comment that said, "Hey, so I was looking at the Seaweed and Gravel website, and I noticed a beauty of a bike. It's the white CB550 called the Quick Build. Wasn't it titled like 30 Build or something?
That one didn't really have a name. It was just that bike actually was one of my personal bikes that it was pretty much built with. I had a bunch of spare parts and a spare bike laying around.
What year was that?
That was a 1974 CB 550. And it was a quick build because it was pretty much this is while I had my shop Ugly Motorbikes. I designated weekends for personal stuff, and I built that one in 3 weekends, just so it was literally just a quick build. Let's see, what was the question?
I didn't ask the question yet.
So there's information on that bike.
He said, I was wondering how much it would cost to commission you to make something like that, or how much would it cost for me to build it myself? Do you have any numbers?
Let's see. Well, that bike actually was the kind of the platform that inspired a lot of clients to come at me with other 550 builds. A lot of the 550 builds I'm doing right now are people have been originally saw that bike and said, I want something like this, but like cleaner. Because that bike was definitely, it
was like a dirty look.
Yeah, I
build.
Personally like my builds or my bikes to be rough and kind of beaten up on.
I could see like Steve McQueen ripping that thing.
I felt like Steve McQueen on that thing.
You looked like Steve McQueen ripping on that thing.
Yeah, it was, and I took that thing.
Toggling the petcock because the float bowl.
Yeah, the float bowl stuck.
Brady toggles a lot of petcocks.
I thought we were over this, guys.
We're never going to be over
yeah, I took that thing off the road many times, and it was just kind of something I could beat up on, and the more I beat up on it, for me personally, I thought it looked even better once it got a little dirt on it. So
what did what'd that sell for?
That one's it's
matter.
pointless to even mention. I sold it to a buddy, one of the other owners of or one of the co-owners of Seaweed and Gravel.
Well, say you sold it on Craigslist or something. What would the resale? Because the guy, that's what he's wondering.
Well,
I wouldn't be able to.
So that bike has been basically what most of the 550s are pretty much loosely modeled off of.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that was like the first 550 I ever released from a client build was the black one with the all black with the white lettering with the Firestone tires. That client came to Seaweed and said, I want a bike just like that white one, but just kind of cleaner and fully done. I wouldn't even consider, for me personally, that the original white 550 was done because it was just something to get on the road and just beat the crap on.
Build. That happens with all of us.
I'm
yeah.
trying to answer the guy's question, like, what if he did this I'm just trying to get an idea. Say you didn't even build it, but you just saw it on Craigslist. What's a reasonable price for a bike built like that?
No, see, that's hard to say. I mean,
$3,000, $2,500, $4,000.
I would have
no
idea.
If you came to Seaweed and Gravel to get a custom build for that bike,
I personally wouldn't build that.
Okay, so let's talk about the black one then.
Okay, well, I mean, the black one.
But he asked about the dirty bike. And this is all hypothetical. If you did happen to build it, what would that sell for? Because I don't know how much work goes into it. I can't really.
I mean, essentially, it's the same amount of work. This is like in the final mock-up.
We'll sell you a clean bike, and you can take it out and rip it around in the dirt and make it dirty.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I would never give that to a client, even if they asked for it. I mean, this is say the final mock-up before everything is broken down and fully restored with all finishes and painted and done. This is kind of fab's done. This is the systems test kind of form with paint on the tank and frame.
Well, if that guy wanted to go build something like this himself, if he had let's assume he had a running 550.
If you had a running 550, I mean, I've got pretty much $500 in parts.
Yeah.
Of course, I did have some extra parts laying around, and I didn't necessarily tally those in, but parts that went into it was $500, and that was I didn't rebuild the motor on this one, and so that's excluding costs for that. Well, I mean, you mentioned a running solid bike,
to do the visual modifications, I mean, looking at that, the majority of that's really labor. It's not a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's I guess it is hard to put a price tag on. It's really your time to
but
do
I spent about $500 on parts and replacing a few things that I didn't have laying around,
right,
and stuff like that. So I mean, you can do it relatively inexpensively.
It all depends on what you have to start with, too.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So that's where that's hard to say. But I mean, our shop minimum right now for a full custom is $7,500, which kind of keeps changing, unfortunately, with more and more demand. But I think I'm booked up for about a year right now. But if you're listening to this podcast, you already, you have the desire to learn this and somewhat try to tackle this on your own. So.
A build like that is anybody could do it with enough time and interest, I guess.
Or 6 days.
Well,
if you're Brady, but
hey guys,
not everybody else.
Somebody
could knock out some. I couldn't do that in 6 days.
I don't even
that
know
would take me 6 months, and it wouldn't look that good.
Somebody just commented on our Instagram on a picture and said,
"Which picture?"
Just of the Motorbike Mondays logo that I posted, and said, "Is Shafe Will? I don't know. That's his Instagram name." But he said, "Just started listening today. Got through about 4 episodes. Great work. I just wish I had heard about this 18 months ago." Well, thank you for listening.
That's rad. I'm always stoked to hear people that find it and go blow through 5 episodes.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you for listening to 4 episodes in one day.
Yeah, that's a lot of us to listen.
That's
to
that's over
sitting.
4 hours of us talking, which could get really old. Probably.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
But
I talk
unfortunately,
in the shower
it wasn't.
And I enjoy myself.
We just started this about 2 months ago, so
no, you wish because he probably started doing.
He's probably started to build 18 months ago.
Yeah, right.
But I'm glad that you are liking it and you're listening to it, and stick with it. I mean, write us on the website, and we'll talk to you on there.
Yeah,
but,
that's
thanks,
awesome,
man. I appreciate it.
Who did I respond to?
You covered that. That was Zach.
Okay. I wish I could have compiled that into a better answer, but it can be a little fuzzy, I guess, on specifics and numbers and stuff like that.
Well, we have multiple people that have asked about lowering or shortening forks. Peter posted a comment on the website that said, any episodes on shortening forks? I've noticed your builds have short forks, and I've been dying to know. We also have Jan from Belgium, which is awesome, said, really enjoying your podcast. Nice work. I have some questions about lowering the front fork of a bike, in particular a Honda 504. How to do it, how much lower, what are the consequences riding it, ground clearance, cornering clearance. Can I find info on the internet? Could this be a topic for one of your shows?
I don't know if there's enough information
probably not an entire
to
show,
do a whole
but
topic.
I explain what you explained to me because I didn't know about doing this. So I'd say go over that real quick. It's good info.
Well, I mean, how I lower shocks. I'm sorry, not shocks, but forks. Is and Jared does it the same way, is lowering, and most people at least
this
should.
Is how you do. This is how
you do
it
at least the proper way without like getting lower springs and stuff like this. And even with lower springs, you should probably still do this anyways to compensate.
Well, and this is a way to do it without having to order brand new fork tubes, that are cut.
Yeah,
that are
like
shortened.
size.
Yeah. You can find this information on the internet too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so like when you lower them internally, essentially what you're doing is you're adding, and it'll make sense once I get into it. So in the fork leg, that's the bottom part of the fork on like a regular telescoping fork or telescoping. And inside of that is called a damper tube. And so what you want to do is there will usually be on the very bottom of the fork leg is an Allen bolt. You want to break that loose. It's usually a 6 millimeter Allen. Break that, and
you got to take the whole.
Pretty much, you take all the internals out
and let all the fork oil out before you do.
Well,
this.
Definitely. I probably should have mentioned
smells really bad.
Old fork oil.
You usually need them in a vise to get that bolt loose, right?
No, it's not all the time, but it's a lot easier. I'd say
sometimes it's difficult because you need a tool or something to jam down there to hold the dampening rod. So that it doesn't spin.
So you want to take the top cap off on the fork legs and then remove the oil and shock. And then if you do have to hold that dampening tube in place, you can do so. And to remove that bottom nut or bottom bolt that holds that dampening tube in place. So once you remove that bolt, then you can slide the fork tube out. And this is kind of just like this isn't like true to all forks, but just giving you an idea. So once you have the dampening tube pulled out and exposed, so say you want to lower it 2 inches. Then you would essentially make a 2-inch spacer that you would sleeve over, I think, like 3 or 7/8, like 7/8, like thin wall steel.
Handlebars work really
good.
Like
old handlebars work.
Like I've used PVC pipe to make spacers to like stiffen the preload.
You could use it, but it might. That's at the bottom, and it's taking all that pressure.
It's taking
so
a lot
PVC
of
might crack.
Yeah, I mean, chances are, if you're doing this, you're not using the stock bars. 7/8 bars usually they're like some. Generally, most bars will sleeve right through this tube.
Right.
And there will be also a spring that's on there. You want to put the spacer on first, and then the spring after that. And what that does is the dampening tube holds the fork tube in place, and that's or it doesn't hold it in place, but it holds. It connects the fork tube.
It holds the fork tube into the bottom of the lower. It connects. It secures the fork tube into the fork lower so that it's not. So that you can't just pull the fork tube out.
Exactly. It pretty much locks it in place.
Right, exactly. Because that dampening rod is tapered and the bottom of the fork tube is tapered. So you put the dampening rod in and it can't slide out over the top of it.
Yeah.
And then it bolts into the bottom of the fork lower with that Allen bolt.
Yeah.
So when you extend that spacer, you're actually pushing the fork tube downwards.
Yeah, you're forcing the fork tube lower into
say
the
2 inches or whatever your spacing is. And so then when you bolt it all back up together, you have 2 inches less of fork tube on the top.
Yeah, and also you'll have two.
And then you'll have 2 inches
extra
more.
inches of spring. And so what I usually do is usually do a 2-to-1 ratio. So say I lower it 2 inches, I'll cut 1 inch off of the spring. And so that'll kind of compensate for, it does tension or give you a little bit more preload, but you're also,
But that's important too.
You're also shortening the travel of the fork as well. So you want a little bit more on there. It's going to cause a little bit more of a stiffer ride. But
you want that sometimes.
yeah,
especially with
exactly.
these old
I think it
forks.
definitely is. I mean,
Well, you're going to lose travel too.
you lose
Yeah.
travel, but
on this kind of bike, it's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going for that look, like
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not a problem.
Well, I mean, I definitely think. I mean, I've done it, and just from stock ride height to say a 1.5 inch like internal lower,
right.
and like maybe a half inch in the triple.
Right.
Like handling like dramatically improves.
Right, and
I
you're
mean,
not going to have any ground clearance. Or
yeah,
cornering
exactly.
issues with
And
that.
and say if it is, you want to make sure to put fork oil back in.
don't
what do you
forget
do about
fork oil.
Do you do something about the rear to match after doing this?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different.
On a-
I've never. I mean,
Do you just use the lowest setting on a twin shock?
I don't usually
Well,
go by that.
usually, yeah.
That just sets the preload. It doesn't necessarily set the ride height.
It pops it up a little bit, but it's
But it's
not,
just you're firming it up,
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
why it's. I usually either base the front off of the rear,
Mm-hmm.
or I just make a whole new stance, or at least
Just new
ride
shock-
height
new
setup.
shock mounts?
Yeah, with not necessarily that. I mean, there's
New shocks.
New shocks.
So you just get new
different
shocks.
lengths.
Yeah,
with
they
Got it.
make a
different
lot of
lengths.
different length shocks and that are pretty universal. I mean, it's
Right.
either eye to eye or eye to
Clevis.
clevis. And so I'll do that. It depends on the application.
And it depends on what you're
shocks do
going
you
for,
use
too.
When you're putting new shocks on one of these.
A few different. It kind of varies on.
Do you spend the money on progressives or?
I usually buy progressives.
I mean, I've put
if you're going
those
to improve, I mean, you
on-
might as well.
Yeah, they make. I've always put those on my BMWs, on the airheads, and on the twin shock rear with progressives over the stock shocks. It's like night and day
Oh, yeah,
difference.
definitely.
God, rides so much better.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of not all of my bikes are, or at least I don't build them for like performance being the top priority.
Right.
So like this 550 that's at Adam shop or Adam who the
Evan.
hell is that?
Evan's shop.
shop that he's doing finish the electrical. Like I have it lowered 3 inches, which at that point you are sacrificing some handling.
Yeah.
But this bike isn't built for that. The client or the rider isn't going to be riding it with a performance priority.
He's not going to be riding at all with it looking like that. He's going to have to fight through a crowd of people to get through. That bike's badass. I
But,
absolutely love how that bike sits.
Yeah, I mean, we did kind of run off on this a little bit, but I hope this gives you an idea.
There was
definitely
enough
is.
people asking that.
Yeah,
it should
there's
be covered.
resources with this. It's best to answer with photos.
Yeah.
We'll post some photos.
Yeah.
we
we
say
can
that,
put
but
some
we
pictures.
don't. But
Yeah.
you can look up on like say how to internally lower forks or something
you'll
like
find,
that, and
like,
you'll
diagrams
find
and stuff
yeah,
on
people
the
love showing off their photos and on their projects. So I would recommend that, but it kind of gives you an idea of at least what to look for, because a lot of people they just cut the shock or cut the springs,
And then you just
and what you're doing is you have no preload, and then you're just creating a Cadillac just swash front suspension, and it can be dangerous.
That's not a great idea.
Yeah, and
'Cause
it's
the spring rate was set based
Yeah,
on the length of that
exactly.
spring, and when you go cut it,
the length of
you-
that tube, the fork tube.
well, but the spring rate's a certain amount because the spring is a certain length. And
Yeah.
once you change that, you're the same spring rate with a shorter spring. It's not at all the way it was meant to work.
yeah, definitely. I mean, It's not, and I think people get that idea from like the little quick getaway to lower a car. It's just cut
you ever done
cut a
that?
coil off. Oh yeah.
Oh man, I did that
I did on a few old VWs.
on my old Pontiac. I cut the coils on the front of my Star Chief, and it looked awesome with some blocks in the back, and then they cut coils. I took off 1.5 coils on the front on each side. But it rode like hell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like
definitely.
it rode good to begin with, but like it was miserable after doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you can get away with it doing that. It's just going to like suffer from your back. Your back's going to suffer. But on a motorcycle, it is very, very unsafe. Especially like going through a corner. You'll find that on fully extended forks, it's going to be nothing, and it's just going to want to slosh out and just kind of fall out from under you. And it's a terrifying feeling. I've ridden a bike that's had that before, and you just don't want to do that.
No, you can't sacrifice cornering on a motorcycle.
But I'd also say the reason that we lower forks predominantly is to level out the bike to get that stance.
Yeah, right.
And so that's why we do it. So if you're not looking for that, then there's no reason to lower the
forks.
forks.
I mean, you can get some performance out of it,
but not
to a certain extent.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, once you pass that threshold, it's becoming kind of stance nation, where it's more look before like actual performance boost.
All right, so what else?
Rob had sent us an email, and it was just kind of a comment. We were talking a while ago about somebody had asked about finding bikes with broken frames or bent frames, and we talked about it a little bit, but nobody had much experience with it. Rob was pretty much commenting on it that he and sounds like him and a friend, I guess, do a lot of work on like late 60s and 70s Japanese enduro bikes, like the little old dirt bikes. And he said that they come across all the time broken and bent frames on those, but they are also fairly easy to fix. But you're totally right about that. We didn't really cover it because it wasn't really the topic.
I don't think we
were
necessarily kind of were even thinking about those.
But I mean, there's no surprise that a small steel frame dirt bike from the 70s has a broken or bent frame.
Definitely.
I mean, kids are riding the crap out of them as hard as they are on dirt bikes now. So there's, I don't know. We don't really. I guess we don't have a whole lot more to say about it.
I guess we don't necessarily come across them too much, at least the older enduros.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
He said, you have to remember that a lot of these smaller enduros were beat to hell by kids back in the day. It's really not hard at all to bend these if a kid was too heavy for the bike or just rode the thing extremely hard.
Yeah, definitely.
You're right, Rob.
So yeah, if you're looking at older enduros, definitely have this be on a little higher on the list to check out.
Yeah.
So Rob, thanks for that, and thanks for your input.
So that covers all our emails and comments for now. So let's talk about
the topic today.
No.
Oh, look
what's
at me.
in the shop?
Guy who doesn't like change.
I was waiting for it. Yeah, you just tried to change it. You can't skip what's in the shop.
You threw me off. You threw me off last week.
You feeling all right? I can't believe you just did that.
I'll go first this week because Brady likes to go first always. So
oh, he's gonna go nuts.
Yeah,
totally throwing
I'm
off
fine.
his routine.
I'm fine.
Chain smoking that thing over there.
What's in the shop? Well, shit. I'm working on.
Are you sure? Do you need some time to
Yeah,
think about
will
it?
we come back to you? Or?
My first build is a 1976 Honda CB550. I sold it to a guy.
You mentioned it last week.
Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, this should actually be under my What's in the Shop section.
Yeah.
It's not in your shop anymore.
Well, okay, it just came from my shop. It was in my shop for the past 2 days, and then now it's at Evan's shop. But put a new battery in it, got everything all good to go and everything, and then we just started blowing fuses like crazy. Wiring harness is just kicking my ass, and so I called the master, and we brought it over here today, and we've been troubleshooting it. And
I don't know about master. I didn't do anything.
Well, we just confirmed
it's gnarly.
that
It's a pretty messy problem.
We just confirmed that it just needs it has the stock harness that had been modified before I got it, and then I modified it.
You know what you need to do is you need to invent a time machine. Go back, play our podcast on wiring harnesses, and then redo that wiring harness.
I'll just build a new wiring harness.
Or a time machine. I mean,
I think I could do a wiring harness in quick time.
The time machine might be easier than fixing that wiring.
Yeah. It's basically, it needs a new harness. Like, there's nothing obvious anywhere, but it's just blowing fuses and shorting out. Like, you rattle a wire and it'll short, but then you can't figure out where it's coming from. And
that is hands down the worst kind of electrical problem, I think.
So that's getting a new harness, which we just talked about the other day. And then just working on my 550 build for the client. It's coming along pretty good. I talked to him. We're going to put some cool new electronic things on there that I'm pretty excited about because I haven't ever used it before. It's basically like, you know how new cars have...
it's like keyless.
Yeah, it's like they have the key fob
ignition.
and you just get in and press a button to start it.
Really?
Yep. And so
that would be cool.
So
I'm not too big on it.
I just want to do it. I want to do it.
I like gadgets like that. Like that's
so
pretty
it's
cool.
not going to have a key switch. It's just going to have.
It's like one more.
You
thing
have the
to
little
fail.
remote that you put in your pocket or whatever. And once
where are
you're
you
within,
getting the electronics for this?
That's why I asked you about that company.
Oh, they have a kit for this or something? Is it meant for motorcycles?
Yeah, it's meant for motorcycles.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay, I totally have to check that out. What was it called again?
Siegler.
Okay.
Siegler, and they make a thing called the M unit, and then this is made for.
How much is that kit?
I believe it's like $200.
Huh.
And then they also
I'll
make
totally
this
look that up.
off topic. I'm
That
putting
sounds really cool.
this keyless deal on there, and then they have like a little. Instead of like a key fob, they have like a little glass tube that you can mount in your glove or like in your boot or in your jeans or wherever in your riding pants or something like that. And so it's just always there. So, when you're
I would just have it on the bike somewhere at all times.
Wait, what is the glass tube?
It's like a key fob, but it's tiny and it's in a little glass, or it's like in a little
like housing or
little housing that you can sew into some fabric or whatever.
Wow.
I lose gloves and
yeah,
ripped
I'd
boots.
be hesitant to like put that on
Yeah.
any of my gear because I change between like
But that's
two
just
different jackets and different gloves
Yeah.
every day.
That's
depending
just
on
like
how
a
cold it
different,
is.
like another key, basically. So you get one key, and then you can buy this other one and have it and program it.
Huh.
But I'm going to do that, and we're going
That's
to do some
cool.
other stuff. So pretty excited about it. And then it's going to be Brady and I are bringing a bike up to the One Moto show.
Yeah.
In Portland in February. So
Yeah,
this is
pretty
going to
pumped
be my
on
bike
that.
for that show, and the client's pretty pumped on that.
When
too.
is that show?
February
7th.
7th?
Yeah, 7th through the 9th.
Yeah.
I'm excited. That's
I want to
actually
check that out. That sounds
It's-
really
So that's
Yeah.
what's in my shop, Brady.
yeah. I don't even know what's in my shop because I haven't been there for the past week. I still am dealing with a broken arm or a broken wrist.
Really quick, how much do you like this carpet? Because Brady's coffee just spilled all over it.
Oh, geez, that was
Hopefully not that much.
really expensive imported IKEA
From Sweden, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So you owe me about $25, or you could just have it cleaned. That'd be fun.
It was not my shoe that caused the
It wasn't my
mess.
shoe either. It was your wire or my wire. I don't know.
So I've
Can't have you
been
guys
kind of out of
around
the
nice
shop.
things at all.
I've been out of the shop for most of the time, just because I can't necessarily accomplish what I need accomplished with one hand. So
I get so bummed when I get there after work and there's nobody to hang out with. It's just a cold, empty shop. Well, it's full of just
Yeah,
bikes,
well,
but-
how do you think it is working here? It's boring. I'm working here all day, and like echoes and shit. There's like nobody in here, and it's like 0 degrees.
yeah,
I'm talking to Murphy all day long. He doesn't talk back.
well, that's good. You just don't necessarily want a dog that talks back all the time.
Well, I mean, sometimes.
So, yeah. So I pretty much at the moment I tried out framing the seat for the XS 750. I'm jumping back on that, but I found out that it took me about a full day to.
It takes two hands. is what I
Yeah,
found out.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, so I'm working out how I'm going to handle that, and kind of been doing more of the back end book side of things for the past little bit. So, that is what's not in my shop.
Well, my shop. So this week I've mainly been working on Brady's CB 550 build, or doing the electrical on it, and I'm almost done. I've got all the harness built for that bike, so I'm just finishing up sleeving it and just tailoring it to the bike. I spent a lot of time coming up with a new universal harness to make a really simple way to run your lights, turn signals, headlight, tail light, with a really easy universal harness you can lay on the bike. So we'll hopefully use these on some more of their builds coming up, and I think I'm going to be making those and selling them through Racetech Electric, so I'll put up some info on those when they're ready. But I got the prototype done, so I'm pretty stoked on that. And that's about it for the last week. I finally sold the XS750,
Yeah.
which was awesome. I'm glad to get that thing out of here. And I have a gigantic box of parts sitting here for the BMW R90. So trying to get on that soon, but I got to knock out the CB first. And of course, I'm still in the middle of my nightmare RMZ 250 motor rebuild, which is on the back burner now. So who knows when I'll get around to it. And that is about it. Oh, I got a couple cool stator rewinds coming up soon. I just had a guy contract me to do a 05 or 07, I don't remember, Harley V-Rod stator.
Oh, you're going to do those?
Yeah. Well,
Nice.
didn't I tell you guys about those?
Yeah.
There's apparently a nationwide back order list on those because Harley's not making
500.
them. Yeah, this dude was number 186 out of 400 something people on a back order list for burned up stators on the V-Rods, and there's no aftermarket support for them. So these guys couldn't find anybody to do it, and I took a look at it, and it's going to be some work, but not too bad. And,
that'll be cool.
Yeah, good money doing rewinds on them, and I'm hoping I can bring in a bunch more. So that's about it. Just working my ass off trying to get all this stuff done before heading out of town for the holidays. So that's about it.
Sweet.
Anyways, let's move on to our topic, ignition systems. So we're going to cover different types of ignition systems, how they work, how to adjust, fix, troubleshoot,
Set.
work on them. So let's start with the probably the more common type for the older bikes we're generally talking about, which is points type ignition, or breaker points, or mechanical points, whatever you want to call it.
They're generally just called points.
So this was used on pretty much all bikes up through
Pretty
late
much.
70s or early 80s.
Early
maybe.
80s.
There was some weird
Pretty much beyond.
They started screwing with electronic ignition or digital ignition,
late 70s.
Late 70s. There's some really weird systems when they first started messing with it. There's actually some I'm not going to go into too much detail, but when they're starting to mess with them, there's some weird crossover mechanical electronic ignition systems.
Yeah.
That are really crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, we don't need to go into that. So we'll talk about point systems on pretty much every bike up to the late 70s. All the Japanese manufacturers use this, and it's really the same system that was used on cars up until probably roughly the same time, I would think. Probably in the early 80s, right, in cars?
Yeah.
So, anyways, who wants to start? You want me to do this? You go over it in general.
Over points?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Here, I'll pull up our. We have some notes on it. Where did that drawing go? Well, you want me to go over it?
Yeah, you go over it. I don't.
Okay.
I know how. That's one of the points and ignition systems. I know how to work on them.
Yeah.
I don't have quite the electrical knowledge to be able to this does this because of this and that stuff. I just know how to fix it.
Which is really probably what people are more interested in. But
I mean, at least like an overview.
We should do an
of how-
overview.
I'll give an overview of how it works. I'll preface this by saying I am absolutely no expert on this. I know generally how they work and how to troubleshoot and fix and adjust them, but I'm no expert on this. So and you guys can feel free to give us some comments on this. So a point system is really pretty simple. You have a couple different components. You have your battery, obviously. You have your ignition coil. You have your spark plug. You have your points system, which is basically a little camshaft, I guess you'd call it, with a lobe on it that actuates an arm which has the points attached to it. And the points are just little like carbon discs, basically, that make a connection. Then you also have a component called the condenser, which is basically just a capacitor. And if you're not familiar with a capacitor stores charge. Basically, it acts similar to a battery, but it does not store current long term. It's a short term current storage device. So, anyways, how the system generally works, you have. Let's think where to start. So, when your engine's running, the cam in the under the points cover is spinning, and like any cam, it's round with a lobe on it that is pointed, and that actuates something that is riding on it. So when the high point of the cam comes around, it forces whatever's riding on it to move. So in that case, I'm sure there's a word for it. I don't really know what to call it, so I'll call it the arm. You have the arm that one of the points is mounted on. When the basically at all the low points of the cam, the points are closed, are connected. And when the high point comes around, it breaks contact by forcing the points apart. So the way this system works is you have basically current from the battery flowing through the wiring harness and therefore through the points when they're closed. It then flows through the primary side of the coil. Your ignition coil is basically a device to step up the voltage extremely high. You need a really high potential voltage to create a really high energy spark. So when the points are closed, you have current flowing through, it completes the circuit, and you have current flowing through the primary side of the ignition coil. As that cam comes around and forces the arm open, it therefore opens the points and breaks the circuit. When that happens, there's only one way for current to flow, which is basically a short. What that allows to happen is the magnetic field that was generated by current flowing through the primary side of the ignition coil collapses, and when that happens, it induces a extremely high voltage in the secondary windings of the coil. And they're really what it's called a coil because it's really just two separate coils of wire inside.
And the secondary windings are also your spark plug wires, essentially.
Yes, they're connected to it, basically, yeah.
So it fires out the spark plug.
Correct. So you have that high potential that is discharged through your spark plug wire, and then it jumps the gap from the electrode to ground, from the tip inside to the arm, which is basically shorted to the case. Your condenser or capacitor is there to basically filter or be like a buffer for the voltage spike that happens when the magnetic field collapses. So when your plug fires, the condenser is there to kind of smooth that out. It prevents like arcing into points, and it makes them last a hell of a lot longer. If you didn't have anything there, you would destroy the system pretty quickly. So all those components are important. I hope I described like how it works. I'll post a diagram on the website because it's kind of hard to, I guess, understand that from me rambling through it. I'll put up a diagram of it that explains it pretty easily. But so the general components that we're worried about in a points ignition system are the ignition coil or coils for multiple cylinder bikes. Those are important, have to be in good working shape. The points themselves are obviously very important. They can be serviced. They can be you can clean up the surface of them with some really fine like sandpaper.
Yeah, if they're too corroded, I would just say don't even bother with them and replace
They're
them.
cheap.
They're
Yeah,
dirt cheap to
very
replace, and it solves that.
The points also need to be adjusted regularly. As
about every 2,000, I'd say, like roughly 2,000 miles, they tend to wear a little bit and then go fall outside of their tolerance. And
well, you have a lot of current flowing through these things, and sooner or later, and they're physically like opening and closing, touching each other, so they will wear down, and they can also get kind of glazed over, so they don't make a very good connection. So your two major service things with the points are keeping them clean, keeping the surfaces of them clean, and then also adjusting the gap. That sets how far open they go. When it goes to open the circuit there, it sets the actual distance that they move as it rides on the high point of the cam. So that's important because if it doesn't open enough, you can get arcing between them and you won't fully break the circuit. If it opens too much, then basically they will stay open for too long and can affect the ignition.
Condenser.
So, and then the condenser is they just will tend to wear out over time. They're just a capacitor. There's not a whole lot to them.
I actually haven't had two. It's not like that's not like very common that I've had condensers go out on me.
No, but they're generally replaced with the points.
Yeah, and so, if not like separately, they're like a couple bucks. The only thing I have had a few condensers out of the box just not be good.
Oh, really?
And that's common too.
That's pretty common.
I've had that problem a couple times.
So if you say got a new one and have swapped it out and it's not working still,
there's a good chance
out of the box. Yeah, and there's a way you can test it. A real quick and kind of field test would be to remove the condenser and place the body, the metal part of the condenser on the negative terminal.
Because they're actually grounded through the
through the
chassis, I guess, the metal case.
And so you would ground that to the negative terminal on the battery, and then the little pigtail coming out, that's your hot lead-in. And connect that to the positive terminal on the battery. Leave it on here for a few seconds, and then take the pigtail and kind of connect it to the body or the chassis of the condenser, and you should see just a quick, like a fat spark come out there.
Yeah.
If that happens, the condenser's good. If it doesn't, it's blown.
You're basically just charging up the capacitor, so it's storing it's
energy.
a voltage there, and then when you short it, you should see the spark of it dumping all its current to ground.
So that's a quick way to test for a capacitor to see if it's good and working properly. And kind of going into now how to adjust points system or set them. What you're going to want to do is first set the gap, and how to do this. You want to rotate the crank bolt. That's usually let's say on like 4-cylinder bikes. The ignition system is or the point system will be on either the left or right side. Generally on Hondas, they're on the right side. Yamahas, they tend to be on the left, and so on. So just on 4-cylinders, they're generally on the sides of the bottom of the case, connected to the cam or crankshaft. So once you expose that, rotate the motor until the proper, there's usually an arrow somewhere, and rotate the motor the right way.
Yeah, make sure that's a big thing.
Yeah, and then when the heel of the breaker or the little arm is the heel is the part that's actually touching or rides on the cam and rides across that lobe. When the heel is actually at the highest point on that cam, that's where you want to leave it. And then this is the gap that you're gonna be setting. So in that gap, on most Japanese bikes, the tolerance is like 0.0012 to 0.016. I usually set them right in the middle at
Can
0.1.
you use a matchbook on these like you could with cars? Is the gap about the same?
They say
I
a business
don't know.
card, like one of the older
Business card.
original business cards that is like kind of clothy paper-ish, you know?
Mm.
A matchbook is about the same thickness.
Like Don Draper would give you in Mad Men.
Yes.
Or just any guy from the 60s.
It's like an old business card, right?
Yeah.
Well, anyways, I always do it with a feeler gauge.
Yeah.
That's
feel
probably
like-
the safer way to do it. Go get a piece of paper from 1967 and
So
But, well, no, I think the thing with the business cards is there's something in the oils in the paper that also helps, like, to clean it or something like that. I'm trying to
I
in
don't
the
know.
paper?
oils in those fibrous old business cards.
chances are you're doing this at your house where you have the appropriate tools.
If,
What if you
if you're
don't?
on the fly,
if you're not a vintage
yeah,
business card collector,
I would feel much more comfortable
You guys don't collect those?
eyeballing it
Yeah.
rather than trusting a 1940s business card.
That's just
That's-
been smashed in somebody's wallet for 30 years. It's just come
30
fresh.
Should've
years.
put that
what
on
year
our-
do you think we're in?
on our tools podcast.
Yeah.
Box of business
Dude, I'm
cards
telling
from
you,
the
ask.
60s.
Yeah.
Ask an old motorcycle mechanic. They'll tell you a
Yeah.
business card.
Okay, use it. Look up the spec in your shop manual and use a feeler gauge.
Yeah. So, so you're setting this, and it's adjusted with a screw to loosen the arm, so you can make your adjustment. Now this will have like some tension on it, so set it, and then when you pull it out, like chances are it's not going when you tighten that bolt that sets it or screw that sets it, it could kind of tuck in a little bit. So you want to double check it, do a couple times, maybe set a little fatter, so when it actually is at rest position, it is at proper
Do
set.
you use a flathead? There's usually a little gap or a little notch that you can use a flathead screwdriver, right, to kind of
Yeah, it's one of
twist
those.
them in and
Most
out?
of the time, it's like a flathead or Phillips head.
No, not like the locking screw.
Oh.
Like, isn't there usually a little?
Okay,
I
think I
can't
know.
even remember the last time I set points on a motorcycle.
I've
But
always
on,
just
on
used my
cars,
fingers
You
to
use like
set it.
a flathead screwdriver, and there's a little notch in the arm, and you can put a flathead in it, and then you can kind of twist it back and forth, and it gives you like leverage to.
I don't know. I mean, I've never set them that way. I mean, I'm not saying it's not there. You can't do it that way. I've just never either looked hard enough for it or done it that way. So either way, as long as you get that proper gap set, you're good to go. And you want to do that first, and then the next you
check
want
the
to
gap again after you tighten it.
Yeah.
To make
Just
sure it didn't
keep
slip.
checking that. You might have to do it a few times, just until that gap is set. You don't want it to be pinching down on it, but you want to be able to slide that feeler gauge to where there's like it's that snug fit. And so get that gap set, and then after this you want to set this would be, I guess, the timing, ignition timing. This is where you want to what I usually do when I'm setting this is I rotate the motor from the crank bolts backwards a little bit, and then not too much, but just like say a quarter turn, and that kind of tugs out the slack in it, and then you want to check that gap one more time. So once you've done this, or just confident that it's set properly, move on to the next. And this is it's going to be you're setting the ignition timing to the rotation and cycle of the motor and piston location. Of the compression stroke. On like kind of there'll be like a little hole or a sight to where like the little marks, the timing marks are. For setting ignition timing, there's a T, which is your top dead center. And then there's another one that says F. F is for fire, or I'm pretty sure they mean different things, but
No, it's top dead center and fire.
okay.
Yeah.
But anyways, those are your marks. You want to time it to fire, the F mark.
Or advance. It's F is it? No. There's two marks. There's a T and an F, and then I think there's another set of marks too.
I mean,
That's
I'm
for
sure
the
there are.
advancing
Like
system.
I know,
Yeah,
like on XS 650s,
I think there's usually
advances.
like 4 marks on them that show you where at what degree the full advance would be, because that's when you can check because most of these have a mechanical advance with little weights that.
Yeah.
Oh, that is one other thing
that's-
to
Mechanical advance.
definitely check. I've had a bike where it ran like shit once it started to build RPMs, and checked the timing. It sounded like a timing issue. Check the timing over and over and over again to find out that behind the point system, behind the points beaker, where the cam is actually connected to, is a mechanical advance. So
the little weight stick. That
like it has like
out,
some
right?
springs on it. As this spins faster and faster,
It throws the weights out.
Yeah, it throws it out. Was that kinetic or not kinetic energy? It's centrifugal energy. Pulls those apart, and what that does is those are grooved on that cam that advances the timing. So it runs the timing is accurate to the higher RPMs. So you want to make sure that these are moving freely and they're not binding up or anything.
So a good way to test that is just to pull off the points plate, and then you can pull off the advanced mechanism.
Yeah.
And you can just move
move the cam with your fingers and make sure that moves freely and smooth.
And the springs aren't sticking or anything like that. It'll like kind of just rotate in your
You want to
hand.
pull them.
Yeah.
Well, you can do it on the bike. You just use your finger and just pull the weights out to full advance, so they're fully extended, and that's where they would be at high RPM, and that's basically throwing the weights out.
Yeah.
And then you want to make sure that they pull back in, so the springs are working correctly, and they return to their no advance setting, which is pulled all the way back in.
Yeah.
But yeah, that can cause all sorts of problems.
Oh, definitely. So here's so now we got that taken care of. So now moving back on to ignition timing. So this you want to unscrew the timing beaker, which is the big plate that all the points and everything is connected to. It's generally 3 bolts. Then you want to loosen those. You don't have to pull them. You just want to loosen them to where you can kind of freely move it around. And there's a couple ways of doing this. The most accurate way was static timing, where you want to at this point, like this is where you can use a light,
timing light,
like not necessarily a timing light, but just those little
a test light.
Test light.
Yeah.
And you want to put it on the say where the pigtail to the condenser leads to, like right there, and then ground it on that little terminal area. You want to take over from there? I feel like I've been talking way too much.
I have to admit that I've kind of just been spacing out this whole time.
All right, here we go.
But I can
be a
go
lot
from
of
there. So basically, static timing, like Brady was saying, you can use a test light. You can also use a multimeter.
Yeah.
You want to attach the ground on the end of your test light to that. I like to put it on the actual, not on the arm of the point that actuates, that moves, but the one that is fixed on the plate. But you can also put it on the little condenser attachment. And basically, what that's going to show, you plug the light. Or so when
well, you can set like just the gator clip on that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And then just stick the little needle, like say on the fins of the of the heads.
Right, so it's grounded.
Yeah.
And then so when the engine...
It's not like a set polarity, so you can...
So when you're cranking your engine, or when you're turning the crankshaft around, when it comes around and it opens the points, your light will not be on.
Yeah, well, you want to make sure that like the ignition is on. You're sending power through the system.
Right.
So if that's just turning the key on, do so, because you need power running through the system to do it this way.
Yeah, and then with the test light.
Yeah.
And then so when you turn your crankshaft and the points open, your light's going to go off, and then when you turn it around again and the points close, the light will go on. Maybe I have that reversed.
No.
You have that backwards.
Yeah.
I have that backwards.
Yeah.
When it
See,
opens,
I told you guys I wasn't paying attention.
When it opens,
When it opens, the light will go
Yeah.
on. So you use this, you look through the little hole on the timing plate, and you have your timing light all hooked up, or your test light all hooked up, so that you can slowly turn the crankshaft, and then you look for those lines to come up, and right as it hits the F mark for fire, you should see your timing light
like just turn on.
Yeah, turn on right there. And that's, even though you probably physically can't see the points
Open
being
or
visibly open, they've lost that contact, so they've started to open right there. And that's where you want to that's how you want to set it. So Brady mentioned the 3 screws that you loosen. You probably can loosen them like a quarter turn, just enough so you can turn the backing plate. And so you turn the backing plate so that when your fire mark is lined up with the mark
on the case,
it adjusts the points so that it's just starting to open right at that point.
Right.
And then when you have that one set, say if you've only got one set of points, then you're done. That's your timing right there.
Yeah, I mean, if you have generally, I mean, there's no more than like 3 sets of points. This would be on like a triple, like say the XS 750 is a 3-cylinder, and it has a point system for each cylinder. Same with pretty much you'll have a points system for each coil you have. So on most 4-cylinders, it's 2 coils, one for say the 1 and 4 cylinder, and the other for the 2 and 3 cylinder. And you're setting, each point refers to each set, or on the 2-cylinder or a twin, you'll have
1.
No.
Depends on
It
the
depends
bike.
on the twin.
Usually 2. And on the look.
CB360 I had just had 1.
Yeah, the KZ750 also has 1.
Because it's a wasted spark ignition. It fires both plugs
on,
always.
Like the exhaust spot.
Yeah.
It's like a dual fire system almost. Or
well, it just always fires both plugs. It's called wasted spark.
Yeah.
One plug is firing when it doesn't need to be, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and also the location of the ignition is on like twins or like 2-cylinder motors. Is usually like on the heads.
Yeah, it's up top.
So
that's not
look
necessarily
for those as well.
On the
Usually
Honda
most of the
on
time.
the Hondas,
yeah, like on the smaller CC motors. With the twins they're on the top.
So that's how you set your first one. You always start with the one that's attached to the backing plate, the one that moves when you turn the backing plate.
Right.
If you have more than one set of points, once you get that first set of points set correctly, tighten those 3 screws back down, and then you'll move to your next set of points, which has its own backing plate that's mounted on the first backing plate. So you loosen those sets, and then you do the same exact thing. Move your clip from your test light to the other arm or the other condenser attachment.
But another thing too is you want to make sure you're timing it to. I mean, unless the beaker is like the timing is like completely 180, you want to time it to the to each. To the system, like the one or the cylinders that correlate with that timing or the point system. So, say the left one that you're doing is for 1 and 4 cylinders, you would time it to that one, and then say the 2 and 3 to say the opposite.
Yeah,
one.
because on the plate or when you're rotating the motor and you're looking through that little peak hole, it'll say 1 and 4, and then
And
it'll
then
say
T,
T
F.
and then F.
Yeah, and then 2
And then
and
the
3.
other, once you rotate it again, it'll say 2 and 3, and then T and then F. So you want to make sure that your left one corresponds to 1 and 4, and the one on the right corresponds to 2 and 3. If that's how it is, you got to look in your manual to verify all of that.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so when you move over to your next one, the main backing plate is now screwed in and locked down, and you repeat the process with moving the secondary backing plate for the second set of points, so that you can move both sets of points individually, and that's how you set them.
Yeah,
with static.
and you
timing.
want to set the gap before on each system before you set the timing on them.
Yeah, because if you set the timing and then try and set the gap, you are going to end up moving the plate and screwing. the
Yeah,
timing
and it's
up
going to
again.
open at a different location.
And then your gap can also be bigger too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so
it's very confusing to listen to.
yeah.
It's very it's hard to explain without seeing it right in front of you.
Once
and,
you get through
Yeah.
it the first time, it's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, because it makes sense to like us because we're visualizing this as
I'll
we're talking
put up
about
a
it
diagram,
too, so.
and then I'll see if I can find a video on YouTube or something that shows somebody doing it. Because
Yeah.
if you can watch
there's tons
it,
of videos.
it's not that difficult.
Yeah.
So a thing to be careful though too, when you're turning the crankshaft by hand, on a lot of these bikes, there's a big nut on the end of the crankshaft, which
Like you're the rotor side you're talking about, right?
yeah, on the right hand side, on the point side, and it's like a 17 millimeter nut that you can turn the crankshaft by.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these bikes have just a small like 10 millimeter nut.
Oh
Right.
yeah, right.
Oh.
And
yeah.
you don't want to turn
You can
it
actually
with,
break.
Yeah.
those,
Yeah, you can
right?
break
Trying
it.
to turn it over.
So you
yeah.
don't want you want to look for another way to turn it besides that. You can use the Kickstarter, pull the plugs and rotate it if you have to.
If you got patience, because
Right.
a lot of times that
Or there's also that I've seen, if there's a small 10 millimeter nut on the end of the timing plate, underneath that points cover somewhere there will be a big, like a plug hole basically, and it looks like it's just a bolt that goes to nothing to the inside of the engine. Pull that out, and there will be a way to turn the crankshaft inside the engine internally.
Yeah, they always
Yeah.
have some safe way to turn it over.
Yeah.
If you're not sure, look it up in the shop manual.
Yeah.
and do it because it's not worth breaking that small bolt.
Yeah, exactly.
On the what are you
Crank.
talking about? On the rotor or whatever. Not rotor.
essentially, I mean, it's connected to the rotor. So.
It's going to be a nightmare if you do
Yeah.
that. You can test ignition coils are generally pretty reliable, but they do fail sometimes. You can test them with a multimeter for resistance. You're basically just measuring the resistance of the coils inside. So you got to test the primary and the secondary. You probably want to look it up in your shop manual so you know which connection is which. But there'll be specs, resistance specs in the shop manual, so I don't know those off the top of my head. But if you suspect your ignition coil has problems, look up those specs and do that test, and that'll point you in the right direction.
I believe that, don't quote me on this, but I believe that stock Honda CB550 coils have, it's like 2.5 ohms or 3 ohms. They're 2.5 or 3 ohm coils. And then CB750s are 5 ohm coils.
I think that's right.
And then after like the 80s or like early 80s, they were all 5 ohm coil.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And if your coils are bad and you're going to buy new ones, you might get lucky buying used ones. But if you're going to buy them, used or new, buy the ones that you can rebuild the spark plug wires.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of them are like hardwired in
Yeah.
there and
Emgo sells aftermarket
coils.
coils for all these old bikes, and they make the ones that have the removable caps and removable wires, and they make the ones that are hardwired in. For the $10 more you're going to spend, buy the ones with removable wires, because you can replace those wires. You can rebuild those basically, because
Yeah.
a lot of times you'll find that what goes bad in your coil is the actual spark plug wire.
Yeah, for sure.
They'll corrode, and it's just like any other kind of wiring on your bike. they'll corrode and they'll get, they just get bad. So buy the ones that you can rebuild for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's enough on points.
I think that covers points. I'll go over electronic ignition. I know this a lot better. There's also not really a whole lot you can test with an electronic ignition system. I'll talk about real quick on like more modern bikes, the system that's used on just about anything. This doesn't really apply to the older bikes that use a field coil rotor type system. But on most, like let's say like mid 80s and up, Japanese bikes, they have, their timing system's pretty simple. They have what's called a pulsar coil or a pickup coil, which is basically a tiny magnet with a little coil of wire wrapped around it. And that coil usually sits next to the flywheel that cups the stator. That flywheel has a ridge, that is, that goes around like the part of the outside diameter of the rotor or the flywheel, and as that ridge flies past or turns past the pulsar coil, it basically induces a really high voltage short duration pulse. So when that happens, basically that pulse is sent to the CDI box. That's what they're usually called, which means capacitive discharge ignition, which is the most common type used now. Basically, it's just a little pulse that provides a timing signal. The timing mark on the rotor is referenced to top dead center on one of the cylinders. So your CDI box knows basically where in the rotation the engine is every time it gets that signal. From there, inside the CDI box, it basically has, it's a digital system, and it has a timing map stored in there. So it knows that when it's at a specific RPM, and it also takes other inputs like the throttle position sensor and other things into account, but it knows that once it's at this RPM, it should be at X degrees of advance. And it's got it's a little table inside, and it knows that, okay, I'm at this RPM, so I need to fire this many degrees before top dead center. Once that happens, basically a capacitor inside the ignition box is charged up, and once the computer inside tells it to fire, it then discharges that capacitor out through the coil, which is your ignition coil works basically the same way as the point system, and that steps it up to super high voltage and fires the plug. So that's really the entire system. The only part that is serviceable or you're able to test aside from the ignition coil is the pulsar coil. It's also called a timing coil or a pickup coil. There is a resistance specification for those, and you can measure the resistance between usually the two wires that come out of it. They totally vary based on the bike, so you'd have to find a spec for it, but you can test those. They do go bad sometimes, so it's something to keep in mind if you are having ignition problems. They usually don't degrade if ignition stops working completely and the resistance doesn't check out. The coil's pretty much bad. The CDI expects a very specific pulse, so if it doesn't get exactly what it's looking for, it won't be able to trigger correctly. So that's the newer type of system that's more modern. It's used on pretty much every modern street bike today. The older style, like you can retrofit a lot of these older bikes that were point systems to electronic ignition. There's lots of different brands and styles of doing this. In general, you are replacing the point system with an electromechanical system to basically get a timing signal. There has to be some sort of computer, I call it a computer, but some sort of circuitry to handle taking this timing signal that is a digital signal, usually a pulse, just like the pulsar coil I was talking about in the other system. And there has to be some sort of circuitry to basically calculate the advance and then fire the plugs at the appropriate time. Some systems, like Dyna makes a system that's used on, they make them for all sorts of different bikes. And that
I definitely
system
don't prefer those.
No, they have a really good
They're good
reputation for being
systems,
reliable.
yeah.
They're super expensive. They also have a separate ignition box that has to be mounted somewhere.
Especially if you're trying to slim down and hide things that are on
Right.
a custom build. This can be another thing to hide.
Yeah.
Which can be annoying.
And the boxes are fairly big.
Yeah. And also, most of their systems require you to use a
Specific coil.
yeah,
right?
or at least a higher output coil.
Well, I think it's their coils.
Yeah, I mean they sell the coils, but you can use just a higher output coil.
And it's if you're spending the money on
Yeah, I
the
mean you could
ignition
easily
system,
spend
it's worth doing.
$700 on their full system.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of like their stage 2.
Right.
It's
a nice. I mean, it's for sure a nice upgrade.
Mhm.
But then there's I hadn't seen this system before, but like Brady's used on this CB550, it's the Pamco ignition, which is
I love it.
really cool.
Mhm.
It's got its own a new rotor basically that replaces. Well, I assume it goes over the.
It
the
just
cam,
replaces the
right?
cam.
It does replace
Yeah.
it. Okay,
And it still uses the mechanical advance.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Oh, okay. Well, that's why there's no really no
yeah,
circuitry
exactly.
needed because the Dyna system doesn't. That
Mhm.
it does. It has its own timing maps stored in the computer.
Gotcha.
So yeah. So okay, that makes a lot more sense. So if it uses the mechanical advance, you're basically just it replaces it with probably Hall effect sensors that they just use a magnet to
Mhm.
create a. It basically works kind of the same way that the points do, but
Yeah.
you get rid of any like
Moving parts.
like
Yeah.
the points actually coming in physical contact with each other. And if it uses the advance that's built in, then it's a really simple system. It all mounts under the side cover,
Mhm.
and you end up with 6 wires that exit the cover, so it's very
4.
easy. No, you got 3 wires per.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A ground, a switched hot, and then the coil
And then the
wires.
coil wires,
So
yeah.
it's pretty nice.
I've used it many times in the past, and it's pretty much the only system I'll use.
It looked like it was like $75 or something, right?
Yeah, it was like
they're-
125.
Oh,
Yeah,
Well-
and they at least make that system for any 4-cylinder, like inline 4.
Pamco's made them for the XS650 for years.
Yeah, the
They're
650.
really popular for that bike.
They make them for some of your smaller like twins as well. I usually I don't even know. I mean the site I order them from is I think it's like cb750ignition.com.
That's what
Yeah,
you
and
sent
then if
to
you
me.
go to cb550ignition.com,
Yeah,
it's the same
exactly.
website.
I mean it's the same part for the 550 as is for the
Have you
750
used-
and so on.
Have you used the Honda Man ignition?
I think it's the same.
No, because I remember you saying
Oh,
that.
that's right.
And
No,
I
it's
looked
not.
it up. It's basically the Dyna system.
But without a box. And it's cheaper. It's
no, it has a box, I think.
Does it?
Yeah. It's different. Okay, no, wait, I take that back. It is not the Dynasty. It is a totally different setup. Because I remember I looked at the pictures yesterday. So, yeah.
I've read about it.
It's totally different. They're all 3 completely different systems.
I'm familiar with this system, and I'm confident it's the only system I use.
I'm sold on it after seeing it on the bike. It's really cool. That's
another
I don't know,
thing,
that's-
at least with electronic ignition systems, is with say you're testing spark, or you're just it's no matter how you get to this point, or if you do, when you do not run the motor or have the ignition system running and working while, say, the spark has nowhere to go. Say the spark plug's pulled, or not even spark plug, just the spark plug cap is pulled, and you're running the motor. That it's sending out that burst of volts, and it has to go somewhere. And you can easily, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't even listening to you when you were talking about it works. I was gonna play it back tomorrow.
burst of volts. That's awesome. Yes, no, and that is
Yeah.
the technical term. It is.
Well, essentially all of
burst
that,
of volts.
all of that freaking burst has to go somewhere, and you can easily fry your ignition system. You can get away with it. It's not really harmful with the point system, but electronic ignition, it's a little bit more sensitive to that. So
Yeah, when you're bursting volts, you got to put it somewhere. So.
So
Be careful of that.
if you are going to say pull the spark plug while it's running, or pull the cap, make sure that is just grounded somewhere so that that spark can be released and find a ground to kind of burst.
Well, it's like giving your ignition system blue balls.
Okay,
Okay,
that works.
So
That works too.
The Honda Man, it's a transistorized ignition system. So basically, you keep the points, but the points don't wear like they did before. They actuate the same, but they act as a trigger basically. So when the point goes around, it triggers it, and then goes to a transistor kind of thing and sends the spark from there.
If it's sending current through them, they will wear out eventually.
Yeah.
They have to. I mean, that's what wears them out.
It's not sending current.
Well, then they can't be doing anything. Like, there's no way they could trigger the system if they weren't using them as a switch.
Okay, I guess they do not wear the same as they do.
No, because
stock.
Well, they're still moving.
No,
And then,
because
but basically, the Honda Man is like $80, and then you keep the points, and the Pamco is $100, and it's fully electronic,
Right.
with solid state parts.
it's because they're probably running a lot less current. They're using them as a switch to trigger the system instead of actually running the current through them that then runs through the primary of the ignition
Yeah,
coil.
so it's
Yeah.
more you're getting the
So-
performance out of it, but there's still that adjustment that regularly needs to be done.
I've
I'm
never
assuming.
tried that
I've never
system,
tried them.
but-
I can't necessarily talk good or bad about them.
Yeah, I'm not either. I'm just saying because I've read about it, and I've read that it works great, but I've also read that Pamco works great
I
for
would-
a quarter of the cost that the Dyna.
Based on what little I know, I would think that the Pamco is a better option.
I think
I'm
so.
going to put an electronic ignition on Zach's CB550,
Yeah.
the custom build I'm doing right now.
and the benefit of it is
Set it and forget it.
You're
yes,
starting, right?
but you can. I mean, you can. It's not necessarily forget it. I mean, sometimes they may need some adjustment, and you do need to set the timing. You need to use a timing light on this, very similar to actually the same way that you would time the points, except you're using this while the motor's running around 4,000 to 5,000 RPMs with a timing light. I don't think we have to go too much into that, but you just want to make sure it's lining up with that F mark. I wanted to talk about like advancing and retarding too, but I don't think we have time for it.
We can do that when we're talking about tuning.
Yeah. What else was I gonna say? Yeah, I guess that's it. They pretty much it's not necessarily a like USB when it first came out. It's like you can plug it in and it just run it, plug in and go.
Yeah, there's a little more to it than
Yeah,
that.
I mean you do have to set it, and then it does need an adjustment over time, but just not as frequent.
Not
because,
as often as the point.
Yeah.
It's definitely a nice upgrade on an older bike. That's for
And
sure.
you do. I mean, what I've noticed is it's much easier to start, and it's a little bit smoother through the RPMs and quicker to respond. I think I'm not confident on this, but there is a bit of an output increase in spark as well.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely beneficial all the way around. You're gonna love yourself a lot more with it, but at the same time, I do prefer and love points.
I run points.
You can
and
work
I
on
love
them.
myself
Yeah.
with them. I could definitely go for some spark right now though, because I'm freezing.
Yeah, it's pretty cold. in
Yeah,
here.
so I think that about covers it for today, and our ignition system topic.
Well, thanks for listening to episode 8 of Motorbike Mondays.
Sorry if we confused you.
I feel like we rambled a lot.
Yeah,
we did
here.
ramble.
This
We
was
apologize.
Probably not our best one, but
It was an off day
Maybe
for
it was
us,
helpful.
but
well, it's a hard thing to talk about.
Yeah,
like just
for sure.
talking, you know. So.
well, even in the beginning, we were just rambling on.
I'll
so-
try and I'll find some resources to
I
put
wasn't
up
even
so
here
there's
this
more
whole
info.
time. So
Yeah, Jared messed everything up.
All right.
That's
Well,
his fault.
we will
I
be
apologize.
back soon. They'll probably. I'm going to be out of town all next week, so I think we'll have a little bit of a delay.
we probably won't see you guys until after the new year.
Yeah, we'll be back in January. So have a good Christmas.
Yeah, happy holidays.
or
Oh, and this one will
Hanukkah,
be probably
or-
posted tomorrow.
Yeah, it looks
because
like something's
iTunes-
going on with iTunes, so I'm going to post this
Hey,
tomorrow
man.
instead of Monday.
Motorbike
Apple
Fridays.
goes on vacation too.
Yeah, apparently. Well,
Yeah. So happy holidays, everybody. And this will be up on Friday tomorrow,
20th. Yes.
20th, Friday or Saturday.
That's
I don't know.
Friday.
20th, yeah.
And then we will see you guys New Year.
All right.
Sound good?
See you.
All right, later,
take
guys.
care.
Bye.